Hi guys, Brian from Boas here. One of the foundations of keeping and breeding locality boas is being sure that the animals you have are in fact descended from that locality. But how can you be certain that this is the case? That's the topic of today's discussion. If you're new to the channel, this is the place for information about all aspects of keeping and breeding boa constrictors in captivity, so be sure to subscribe if you want to learn all about these amazing animals. So first I'm going to discuss the way that is the only way that you can be 100% absolutely positive that your animal is of that locality. And that is to collect it yourself from the wild. And I understand that this, of course, is not possible for the vast majority of people. Even if you live in an area that has boa constrictors that are endemic, you may not have the permits to collect the animal, and certainly if you want to export it to another country, that would probably be very problematic. So if you're a general hobbyist living in an area that boa constrictors don't live, it's really not going to be practical for you to try to travel to their native range and to try to collect them and bring them back. So unfortunately, it's very difficult, at least philosophically, to be 100% absolutely positive that your boa constrictor is indeed from that locality. So that being said, there are some ways that you can be reasonably confident, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the animal you have is of the stated locality. I'm going to review a few different ways that you can use to verify the locality of your boa and be sure that it's consistent with that given locality, and thus have confidence that your boas are indeed of the stated localities. And although each of these methods by itself won't 100% prove that your boa is from that locality, it will give you evidence and let you build a case beyond a reasonable doubt that your boa is of the stated locality. Almost like a court case where you collect evidence from several different areas to support your contention. The first type of evidence to support the locality of your boa constrictor is any associated paperwork. And when it comes to papers on boas, people have a lot of misconceptions about what this means. So I just wanted to go over the different types of paperwork. And the paperwork is neither necessary to support your locality, nor is it by itself it will prove your locality. It's just something that you can use along with the other types of evidence to support that your animal is in fact of that locality. So a lot of people think that paperwork for boas is kind of like papers for dogs. So with dogs you have the American Kennel Club, which certifies that animals are of a specific breed based on their pedigrees, and it tracks the pedigree. There is no American, boa breeders club that tracks pedigrees of boas. So there's no similar organization, and they're not tracking any kind of registry of boas or anything like that. So the paperwork can be of various types, and the paperwork, although it's nice, it doesn't really prove anything. And just because you don't have any paperwork on your boa, don't fret, because it can still be a pure locality boa. So one of the most common types of paperwork is called a CITES document, and this is a CITES document. If you're not familiar with CITES, this is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, and since boa constrictors are listed on this agreement, this is an international agreement. For an animal to be exported from a country, it requires a CITES document. So this one is a CITES document that went with this boa. This is an Iquitos, Peru boa constrictor that was bred on a farm down in Peru. And so this document says boa constrictor, and it says Peru. So based on this document, we know there was a boa constrictor exported from Peru. Does that mean that this is a boa constrictor from Peru? No, not by itself. It just goes along with the boa constrictor, and it supports the contention that this animal came from Peru. But anybody could have easily swapped this with another animal. You can make photocopies of this, put it with whichever animal you like. There's nothing specific on the CITES document that ties it to this animal. So anybody could fraudulently use this to support any animal they like. Also, if you don't have these documents, it's really not a huge deal, because there are other ways of verifying or supporting the locality of your boa besides these documents. I mean, they're nice to have If you don't have them, it might not be the end of the world. But the CITES document is one type of paperwork that goes along with a BOA to support where it was exported from. So getting back to the comparison of dogs that have the AKC that issues papers that can support a dog's pedigree. Dogs, you can also get a DNA test done which will tell you what breed your animal is originated from. And they have a large enough body of data of other dogs that they can be reasonably certain that it fits into these breeds. With Boas, there's no such DNA tests available. And although they're theoretically possible, I don't see them likely to be commercially available, at least not for a long time. So you can't just simply send a DNA sample of your snake to be identified as far as its locality. So then the other main type of paperwork are receipts from the breeders. And so if you buy from a responsible breeder, they'll give you a receipt, and the receipt will say information about the animal, the birth date, what the locality is, and it will also typically say the bloodline. For example, this is a receipt for a Croix Boa that I bought, and it says from Rio Bravo bloodlines. And it's a very respected breeder that sold me this animal, and I trust him. And so this is actually a lot better than CITES papers as far as I'm concerned. So if you have the receipts from the breeders that indicate the bloodline and or locality, be sure to keep these in a file that goes with your Boas, just so you can keep track of the localities and bloodlines. And if you ever sell your animals, you'll want to include this as well. But the breeder receipts are a good way of supporting the locality of your particular Boa. The second way to support the locality of your animal is by the physical characteristics. Are the physical characteristics consistent with other animals of that locality? And so I'll say this particular animal, even if I didn't have that CITES paperwork, I would still be reasonably confident that this was indeed an Iquitos, Peru red-tailed boa. And it has to do with its physical characteristics. So there's lots of physical characteristics. There's quantitative ones. You can count scale rows of dorsal and ventral scales, etc. You can look at the head shape and the body shape and see if it's consistent with that locality. You can count the number of saddles. Of course, the color and the pattern is characteristic of, in some cases, of a given locality. And so each of these individual characteristics is not going to be diagnostic of a locality, but together they are going to support the contention that that animal is of that given locality. And so there's the quantitative things that you can measure, and there's also the more qualitative things, kind of the overall look. And so different localities will often have this look that's associated with them, and it takes a lot of looking at pictures of boas and actual boas to be able to have confidence in identifying what locality the animal might be from based on its looks. If you're new to locality boas, I would suggest you try to familiarize yourself with as many different locality boas and their looks as possible. And obviously you can get books that have pictures of the locality boas, but also on the internet there's a huge number of pictures. You can just do a search on Google Images for Peruvian boa, Suriname boa, etc., and look at the associated looks with those particular localities. There's also a lot of Facebook groups that are devoted to locality boas, and will have pictures of different localities. And then if you're in doubt of your particular boa, you can always post a picture and ask people what they think. And of course you might get a multitude of answers, but a lot of them may be the correct ones. Sometimes you're not able to differentiate localities based on physical looks. For example, the Suriname and Guyana true red-tailed boas are actually very, very similar. And although this is a subject of considerable debate, which I went over in a previous video, some people claim that there's really no difference between the Suriname and the Guyana locality boas other than the country they originated from. But based on their characteristics, their biology, they're indistinguishable. So in the case of the Suriname and Guyana boas, you're really going to need some locality information in addition to their physical characteristics to be able to support what type of boa that is. You could maybe say that this is consistent with a Guiana shield animal from northern South America. It could be Guyana, Suriname, French Guiana, or even from North Brazil. All those boas are very similar looking, and you can't really differentiate based on physical characteristics. There's one other really valuable resource for locality boa collectors, and this is a website called inaturalist.org. And what Inaturalist is they've crowdsourced observations about the natural world, about different species in nature. And the way it works is that people will actually take pictures of boas, reptiles, basically any type of animal or plant, and they have precise GPS data associated with that particular animal. So they're out hiking and just observing nature. They come across a boa constrictor somewhere in the rainforest and they snap a picture, and then it gets uploaded to the site. And now you instantly have a picture of an animal in the wild plus the precise location. So it's a gold mine for the locality boa collectors. And the site is relatively new. I've kind of fiddled around with it a bit, but I'm still kind of figuring it out. I plan on releasing a video specifically on Inaturalist at some point in the future. But you can go there and you can look at the pictures, and you can look up a certain location. You might want to look at boas in Ecuador and see what they look like. And what I found interesting is that a lot of the animals on Inaturalist look similar to the locality boas in collections in the United States, but a lot of them also look different. So what this tells me is that the animals that we have in our breeding collections in the United States are probably a small minority of the total diversity of boa constrictors over their range. But it's a great website to go to, and if you find an animal that looks just like yours and it's from the given locality, that can support that your animal is indeed from that particular locality or a locality that's close by. Of course, sometimes animals from a large range can look pretty similar, so this should be taken in context of the other types of evidence which I'm going over in this video. The last main type of evidence that you should use to support the locality of your locality boa is the reputation of the breeder or seller. So is that breeder or seller known for working with that particular locality? Do you know other people that have gotten their animals from this particular breeder? Can the breeder back up the stated localities of their animals? And do they have information about the parents of the animals they're selling, and perhaps the grandparents of those animals going back the whole pedigree? And are they able to share any receipts or other paperwork that backs up the ancestry of these animals? So it's always a good idea to ask these questions of the breeder before you buy the animal. So if you look at the picture of the animal and you have any doubt as to the locality, definitely ask the breeder for that information. And as I said earlier, responsible breeders will provide receipts so that people can look at the receipts and they know the reputation of that breeder, and they can be reasonably confident that that animal is indeed of the stated locality. Often the way that you're going to find a breeder for your desired locality is by seeing other people's pictures of animals that they've gotten from that breeder, and then you can get in touch with that breeder. So if there are a lot of people out there who are vouching for the reputation of the breeder and are confident that their animals are indeed of that locality, you can feel pretty confident that you're going to get the real thing and the animals will be of the stated locality. And then combined with the other types of evidence I've talked about, you should feel reasonably confident that you do indeed have an animal from that locality. To end the video, I wanted to discuss a few more things you should be aware of regarding the topic of assuring that you have the stated locality of your boa. And that is the topic of morphs. Sometimes people will be selling an animal as both a morph boa and a locality boa. And although there are such a thing as locality-specific morphs, often when they use both a morph and a locality, they're really not being correct. And so this is actually a locality-specific morph. This is an anerythristic peregrinera boa from Venezuela. So the wild type form has more of a reddish brownish coloration. You can see this animal lacks the red pigment, and it's got more of a silvery color. And this is a morph which did originate in the Peregrinera boas. Incidentally, there are a lot of other types of anerythristic boas which originated in other localities of boa, but I know that this particular animal is a pure anerythristic Peregrinera boa. However, there are some types of morphs which are not associated with a locality. For example, there are no anerythristic Suriname red-tail boas. So if you do see somebody selling a Suriname red-tail that they claim is anerythristic, it's most likely a hybrid. They just crossed a Suriname red-tail boa with an anerythristic common boa that doesn't really have a specific locality. And so it's really not correct to call it a locality-specific boa. It's basically a hybrid. And it should be described as a Suriname boa crossed with an anerythristic boa. And I've seen a lot of examples of this lately. You know, the classic example is something called a hypo hog, where they take a Hog Island, pure Hog Island boa, and they cross it with a hypo common boa, and the resulting offspring are 50% Hog Island, but they should not be labeled as Hog Island boas because they're hybrids. And so be aware, if you want to get a pure Hog Island boa, do not buy a hypo hog boa. I've even seen lately things like Hog Island boa het for the blood gene, and the blood gene didn't originate in Hog Island boas. So the only way that this would be possible is if you cross a Hog Island boa with a blood boa. I've even seen someone had a Pearl Island boa that they said was het for a leopard, and the leopard gene does not occur in the Pearl Island boas. So again, I think that this is a hybrid. And so be really careful if you want to buy a locality-specific boa. Do not buy an animal that has a gene that's not associated with that particular locality. And if you check out my video on locality-specific morphs, I went over some true locality-specific morph boas where you can buy the animal and still be sure that you are getting potentially a pure locality boa. The last point I wanted to make is that many boas in captivity do not have a specific locality. So these are typically animals that have been in captivity a very long time, for many generations, and they've been crossed with numerous localities. So at this point they're basically a mixed breed. You know, if you want to call it a mutt, you could call it a mutt, but it's a non-locality specific pet boa. And there's nothing wrong with these animals. They make great pets, and you know, if you want a pet boa, that's probably your best bet. But you should not assign a specific locality to these animals. And you also shouldn't be trying to assign a locality, because at this point they're basically domestically produced boas. So in order to be a pure locality, the animal has to have 100% of that particular locality. So all of the ancestors that it originates from have to be traced back to that particular locality. And if you cross in another locality, at that point the lineage stops being a locality-specific animal. So those are some things to watch out for when you're acquiring locality-specific boas in order to assure that they are of the stated locality. I hope this video was helpful. As always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me. Thanks for watching, and enjoy your boas.